Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Dylan Torres had learned early in life that appearances could be deceiving. At 34, he maintained the facade of a simple construction foreman, coming home each evening with dirt under his fingernails and concrete dust in his hair. What his wife Brianna didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Dylan had spent 8 years in military intelligence before transitioning to civilian life. His current job was deliberate cover, allowing him to move through different social circles unnoticed while building a network of contacts that spanned from blue-collar workers to high society elites. Their marriage had started as a fairy tale. Brianna Walsh, the beautiful daughter of a prominent real estate family, had met Dylan at a charity fundraiser 5 years ago. She'd been drawn to his quiet confidence and piercing blue eyes, mistaking his controlled demeanor for simple honesty. Dylan had been genuinely smitten with her golden hair and bright smile, but more importantly, he'd seen in her the perfect civilian life he'd craved after years of shadows and secrets. The Walsh family had initially opposed the match. Richard Walsh, Brianna's father, made no secret of his disappointment that his daughter was marrying beneath her station. Her mother, Patricia, was more subtle but equally disapproving. Her younger brother, Kevin, openly mocked Dylan at family gatherings, calling him the hired help behind his back. Only Brianna had defended him in those early days, her eyes blazing with the fire Dylan had fallen for. But over the past year, that fire had dimmed. Dylan noticed the small changes first, the way she'd grown distant during their conversations, how she'd started working late at her family's real estate firm, the new wardrobe that seemed designed for someone else's eyes. As someone trained to read people, Dylan recognized the signs of deception, but he'd hoped he was wrong. He'd wanted to be wrong. Their small house in Millbrook had become a stage where they performed the roles of a happy couple. Dylan would arrive home at 6, shower off the day's work, and sit down to dinner with a wife who was increasingly elsewhere, even when she was physically present. She'd scroll through her phone during meals, claim headaches when he reached for her at night, and find excuses to avoid spending weekends together. Dylan's real work, the consulting he did for private security firms, the discreet investigations he handled for old military contacts, happened in the hours when Brianna thought he was sleeping. He'd built a reputation in underground circles as someone who could solve problems that required both intelligence and ruthlessness. The construction job provided perfect cover and legitimate income, but his real money came from jobs that would have terrified his wife had she known about them. The irony wasn't lost on him. Brianna was cheating on one of the few men in the city who could destroy someone's life without leaving fingerprints, and she had no idea. He'd given her everything she'd asked for: a stable home, faithfulness, and his complete devotion. In return, she'd given him contempt disguised as marriage. As their 5th anniversary approached, Dylan made a decision. He would give Brianna one final chance to come clean, to remember what they'd once meant to each other. If she chose deception instead of honesty, he would show her exactly who she'd married and what happened to people who betrayed Dylan Torres. The anniversary party was Brianna's idea, naturally. She wanted to celebrate at the Millbrook Country Club, surrounded by her family and their social circle. Dylan had agreed, even though he knew the guest list would be filled with people who'd never respected him. He'd even paid for the entire event, using money from a recent job that had involved permanently relocating a Russian oligarch's assets. As he stood in their bedroom, adjusting his tie for the party, Dylan caught Brianna's reflection in the mirror. She was beautiful in her red dress, but there was something calculated about her appearance tonight. She looked like a woman preparing for war, not celebration. "You clean up nice for a construction worker," she said, her tone carrying an edge he'd been hearing more often lately. Dylan turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" She shrugged, focusing on her earrings. "Take it however you want." He studied her for a long moment, memorizing every detail. After tonight, everything would change. "Brianna," he said softly, "is there anything you want to tell me before we go?" For just an instant, he saw something flicker in her eyes, guilt, perhaps, or fear. but it was gone quickly, replaced by the cold stranger she'd become. Like what? She asked. Like the truth. She laughed, but it sounded forced. You're being dramatic, Dylan. Come on, we'll be late for our own party. As they drove to the country club, Dylan made one final decision. He reached into his jacket pocket and touched the envelope he'd prepared. Inside were documents that would change everything, not just for Brianna, but for everyone who'd participated in her deception. The contents represented months of careful planning and investigation, the kind of thorough preparation that had kept him alive during his military years. Tonight, Dylan Torres would remind everyone why it was dangerous to underestimate a quiet man. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The Millbrook Country Club sparkled under crystal chandeliers as guests arrived for the Torres anniversary celebration. Dylan recognized most of the faces, Brianna's family, her co-workers from Walsh Realty, and various members of their social circle. What struck him was how many of them avoided direct eye contact, offering instead the kind of pitying smiles reserved for men who were the last to know about their wives' infidelity. Trevor Hoffman arrived fashionably late, his silver Porsche pulling up to the valet stand with deliberate flair. Dylan watched from across the room as Trevor made his entrance, tall, perfectly groomed, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. He was everything Dylan appeared not to be: wealthy, connected, and born into the kind of privilege that opened doors without effort. What made it particularly galling was that Dylan had introduced them. Trevor was a client from 6 months ago, though he didn't know Dylan's real identity. He'd hired Dylan through intermediaries to handle a delicate problem involving a business rival who'd been spreading damaging rumors. Dylan had solved the problem efficiently, and Trevor had been so impressed that he'd recommended Dylan's services to others in his circle. The irony was perfect and bitter. Trevor was sleeping with Dylan's wife, never suspecting that the quiet construction worker he occasionally nodded to at social events was the same shadow operator who'd saved his reputation. Dylan positioned himself at the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching the subtle interactions around the room. His trained eye caught the meaningful glances between Brianna and Trevor, the way her brother Kevin smirked whenever he looked in Dylan's direction, and the uncomfortable shifting of guests who clearly knew more than they were saying. Patricia Walsh approached the bar, her smile as artificial as her jewelry. Dylan, dear, you look handsome tonight, though I do hope you washed all the construction dust off first. Her laugh was like broken glass. I always clean up well, Mrs. Walsh, Dylan replied evenly. It's amazing what people don't see when they're not really looking. Something in his tone made her pause, but before she could respond, Richard Walsh joined them. Brianna's father was a large man who'd grown soft from years of easy living, but he still carried himself with the arrogance of inherited wealth. Dylan, Richard said, his greeting perfunctory. I was just telling Trevor about that new development we're planning in the hills. He might be interested in investing. Dylan's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on his glass. Trevor Hoffman? The real estate developer. The very one. Successful man, that Trevor. Self-made, ambitious. The kind of man who knows how to seize opportunities. Richard's emphasis on the last word was unmistakable. I'm sure he does, Dylan said quietly. I imagine he's very good at taking what doesn't belong to him. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, the club's event coordinator announced that dinner was about to be served. As guests moved toward their tables, Dylan noticed how naturally Brianna and Trevor ended up seated near each other, despite supposedly random seating arrangements. During dinner, Dylan played the role of devoted husband perfectly. He laughed at the appropriate moments, nodded along with conversations, and gave a brief speech thanking everyone for celebrating their anniversary. But internally, he was cataloging every slight, every smirk, every knowing look exchanged between the conspirators around him. Kevin Walsh, emboldened by wine and surrounded by his family's enablers, decided to entertain the table with stories about Dylan's humble background. Remember when Brianna first brought him home? Kevin laughed. Dad thought she was joking. A construction worker. We figured it was just a phase. Kevin, Brianna said, but her protest was half-hearted. No, it's fine, Dylan said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make Kevin pause. I've always believed that a man's worth isn't determined by his job title. It's determined by what he's capable of when pushed too far. The table fell silent for a moment, the temperature seeming to drop several degrees. Trevor leaned forward, his eyes curious. That's an interesting philosophy, Dylan. Very intense. Dylan met his gaze directly. I learned it in the military. 8 years of dealing with people who underestimated quiet men. It's amazing how often that becomes their final mistake. Trevor's smile faltered slightly. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that there might be more to their mild-mannered host than they'd assumed. As dessert was being served, Dylan excused himself to step outside. The evening air was cool against his skin as he walked to the parking lot. Pulling out a secure phone he kept for his real work. He dialed a number from memory. Rodriguez here. Carlos, it's Torres. I need a favor. Dylan? Shit, man. I haven't heard from you in months. What do you need? Background check on a Trevor Hoffman. Real estate developer. Drives a silver Porsche. Probably has some dirty laundry he'd prefer stayed hidden. How deep do you want me to dig? All the way to bedrock. Financial records, personal history, anything that could be used as leverage. And Carlos? I need it fast. This personal? Dylan looked back toward the country club, where his wife was probably making eyes at her lover while surrounded by people who thought he was too stupid to notice. Very. I'll have something for you by morning. You okay, Hermano? I will be. As Dylan walked back toward the club, he saw Trevor stepping out for a smoke. They met on the pathway, two men who knew each other far better than either realized. Hell of a party, Trevor said, lighting a cigarette with gold lighter. Your wife knows how to put on an event. She's always been good at performances, Dylan replied. Though I'm starting to wonder who her real audience is. Trevor's hand paused halfway to his mouth. What do you mean? Dylan stepped closer, close enough that Trevor could see the cold calculation in his eyes. I mean that some performances have consequences when the wrong person figures out what's really going on. For a moment, Trevor looked genuinely nervous. Then he seemed to remember who he was supposed to be. The successful businessman talking to the simple construction worker. His confidence returned. You sound paranoid, friend. Maybe you should trust your wife more. Dylan smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was genuine. Trust is earned, Trevor, and it can be lost very quickly when people make the wrong choices. As they walked back inside together, Dylan felt a familiar calm settling over him. It was the same feeling he'd had before complex operations in the field, the certainty that came with having a plan and the skills to execute it. Trevor Hoffman and everyone else who'd participated in his humiliation were about to learn exactly who they'd been underestimating. The anniversary party was about to become a very different kind of celebration. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The moment arrived during the gift presentation. Patricia Walsh had insisted on making it a public affair, encouraging guests to share their presents and well wishes for the happy couple. Dylan watched as Brianna received jewelry, wine, and expensive trinkets from their friends and family, her smile bright and hollow as a carnival mask. When it was time for the couple to exchange gifts, Brianna went first. She presented Dylan with an expensive watch, the kind of gesture that looked generous but felt perfunctory. To my hard-working husband, she announced to the crowd, who always puts in such long hours. The irony wasn't lost on Dylan. She thought his long hours were spent pouring concrete, when he was actually building the kind of network that could destroy lives with a phone call. When his turn came, Dylan stood slowly, every eye in the room upon him. He'd been waiting for this moment since the evening began, watching the subtle interplay between his wife and her lover, cataloging the smirks and knowing glances of people who thought they were witnessing a fool's celebration. Before I give Brianna her gift, Dylan said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It's not often you get to see exactly who your real friends are. Something in his tone made several guests shift uncomfortably. Brianna's smile flickered slightly. Marriage is about trust, Dylan continued, his eyes moving deliberately around the room, lingering on specific faces. It's about honesty. It's about having someone who has your back when the rest of the world turns against you. His gaze settled on Trevor, who had gone very still. Of course, that only works when both people are actually committed to the marriage. Dylan, Brianna said, her voice carrying a warning note. He ignored her, reaching into his jacket pocket. 5 years ago, I married a woman I thought I knew. A woman I believed would stand by me through anything. A woman who promised to love, honor, and cherish me until death do us part. The room was completely silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. But sometimes, Dylan said, pulling out the envelope, you discover that the person you married isn't who you thought they were. Sometimes you find out that while you were working to build a life together, they were busy tearing it down behind your back. Brianna's face had gone pale. What are you doing? Dylan looked at her for a long moment, memorizing the fear in her eyes. Then he turned to address the room again. At the anniversary party, my wife announced, I married a broke loser who can't provide. As her family laughed. But before she could speak, Dylan held up his hand. Actually, let me save you the trouble, darling. I know exactly what you think of me. I've heard the conversations you think I can't hear. I've seen the messages you think I can't access. I know about the meetings you think I don't know about. Kevin Walsh started to stand, but something in Dylan's expression made him sink back into his chair. So here's my anniversary gift to my beloved wife, Dylan said, placing the envelope on the cake table with deliberate ceremony. Happy anniversary, darling. The envelope was thick, sealed with red wax that gleamed under the chandelier lights. Brianna stared at it as if it were a snake. Open it, Dylan said softly. Dylan, please, she whispered, but her voice was barely audible. Open it, or I will. With trembling hands, Brianna broke the seal. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Her face went white as she looked at the first image, then red as she flipped through the rest. The photos showed her and Trevor in various compromising situations, entering hotels together, kissing in restaurant parking lots, embracing in his car. But that wasn't all. Mixed in with the surveillance photos were documents that made Trevor's face drain of color. Financial records showing suspicious transactions, evidence of permit violations on his construction projects, and correspondence with city officials that suggested bribery. You see, Dylan said, his voice conversational, I've been working very long hours lately. But not the kind of hours you thought. Brianna dropped the photographs as if they were on fire. Several scattered across the floor, clearly visible to the horrified guests. Dylan, Trevor started to speak, but Dylan cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. Trevor Hoffman, Dylan said, his voice carrying military authority now. Real estate developer, tax evader, and apparently, a man who enjoys taking what doesn't belong to him. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Trevor's expensive suit suddenly looked like costume on a terrified actor. I don't know what you think you know, but nothing. Dylan's voice was ice. I know exactly what you are, what you've done, and what you're going to do next. He walked to the edge of the room, where guests were beginning to murmur and shift toward the exits. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for ruining your evening. But I wanted you all to see this because some of you already knew. Some of you have been laughing behind my back for months, thinking I was too stupid to figure out what was happening in my own marriage. Richard Walsh finally found his voice. Dylan, I think you're overreacting. Am I, Richard? Dylan's smile was sharp as a blade. Your daughter has been having an affair for 8 months. Your family has been treating me like a joke for years. And tonight was supposed to be my humiliation party, wasn't it? The night when poor, stupid Dylan finally got the public embarrassment you all thought he deserved. He walked back to the cake table, his movements controlled and predatory. But here's what none of you understood. You didn't marry your daughter to a construction worker, Richard. You married her to someone far more dangerous than you could have imagined. Dylan pulled out his phone and walked outside, the crowd parting before him like water. As he reached the parking lot, he could hear voices rising behind him. Brianna screaming, Trevor shouting denials, and the general chaos of a social gathering collapsing into scandal. He dialed a number and waited for it to connect. It's Torres. Phase 1 is complete. You can begin Phase 2. Copy that. How loud do you want this to get? Dylan looked back at the country club, where he could see figures moving frantically past the windows. Through the glass, he could see Brianna holding the scattered photographs, her perfect party destroyed, her secret exposed, her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. When she opened it, Dylan said into the phone, watching his wife's world collapse in real time. She screamed. And she was still screaming. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. By morning, Dylan's phone had received 17 missed calls from Brianna and 43 text messages ranging from desperate apologies to furious accusations. He ignored them all while reviewing the additional intelligence Carlos Rodriguez had provided overnight. Trevor Hoffman's background was even dirtier than Dylan had hoped. The financial irregularities went back years, involving shell companies, falsified permits, and a network of city officials who'd been taking bribes in exchange for favorable zoning decisions. But more importantly, Carlos had uncovered Trevor's pattern of predatory behavior toward married women. Apparently, Brianna wasn't his first conquest among the wives of men he considered beneath him. Dylan sat in his kitchen, methodically organizing the information into categories: financial crimes, personal indiscretions, and professional misconduct. Each category represented a different pressure point, a different way to apply leverage. His military training had taught him that the most effective operations attacked multiple fronts simultaneously, preventing the enemy from regrouping or mounting an effective defense. The front door slammed open, and Brianna burst in, still wearing her dress from the night before. Her makeup was smeared, her perfect hair disheveled, and her eyes were red from crying, or rage, or both. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she screamed, throwing her purse across the room. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What you destroyed?" Dylan looked up from his papers, his expression calm. "I've destroyed a lie, Brianna. The truth was always going to come out eventually." "The truth?" She laughed hysterically. "The truth is that you're a pathetic, vindictive man who can't handle the fact that his wife found someone better." "Better?" Dylan set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "You mean Trevor? The man who's been stealing from the city for years? The man who's done this exact same thing to at least 6 other married women? The man who was planning to dump you as soon as he got bored?" Brianna's face went white. "That's not true." Dylan reached for another folder, this one containing screenshots of Trevor's text messages with other women, including recent conversations about wrapping up the Walsh situation and moving on to greener pastures. He slid the papers across the table toward her. "Read them," he said quietly. "All of them. See how special you really were to him." Brianna's hand shook as she picked up the first page. Dylan watched her face change as she read Trevor's casual dismissal of their relationship, his crude descriptions of their encounters, and his mocking comments about her emotional investment in their affair. "He called you the construction worker's desperate wife," Dylan said, his voice clinically detached. "Said you were easy but exhausting, and that he'd have to find a way to cut you loose without too much drama." The papers scattered from Brianna's fingers as she collapsed into a chair. For a moment, Dylan almost felt sorry for her. Then he remembered the laughter at the country club, the months of lies, and the contempt in her voice every time she called him a broke loser. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do this to us? We could have worked things out. We could have worked things out." Dylan's voice was dangerously quiet. "When were you planning to have that conversation, Brianna? Before or after you humiliated me in front of everyone we know? You never meant to get caught." Dylan stood, his full height and military bearing suddenly imposing in the small kitchen. "But you meant every lie, every betrayal, every moment you looked me in the eye and pretended we had a marriage worth saving." Brianna tried a different approach, the manipulation tactics that had worked on him in the past. "Dylan, please. I made a mistake. I was confused, lonely. You worked so much, and I felt neglected. Can't you understand?" "Understand perfectly," Dylan said. "You felt entitled to destroy our marriage because you were bored. You felt justified in making me look like a fool because you thought I was too stupid to figure it out. And you felt safe doing it because you thought I was harmless." He walked to the window, looking out the street where they'd once planned to build a life together. "But that's where you made your real mistake, Brianna. You never knew who you married. You saw what you wanted to see. A simple man with a simple job who would provide for you and never ask difficult questions. Then who are you? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dylan turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw him without his carefully constructed mask. The man looking at her wasn't the mild-mannered construction worker she'd married. This was someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. I'm someone who solves problems, Brianna. Permanently. I'm someone who's very good at making people disappear when they become inconvenient. I'm someone who spent years learning how to destroy lives so thoroughly that the targets never recover. Brianna shrank back in her chair. You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Because everything you thought you knew about your husband was a lie designed to keep you safe. But you threw that safety away when you decided I wasn't worth your loyalty. Dylan's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled, though there was no warmth in the expression. Trevor's been arrested, he announced casually. Federal charges. It seems someone tipped off the FBI about his financial irregularities. They're calling it the largest municipal corruption case in the state's history. Brianna stared at him in horror. You did this. I did this, Dylan confirmed. And this is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, everyone who participated in your little deception will understand exactly what happens when they make the mistake of betraying me. Dylan, you can't. I could do whatever I want, Brianna. That's what you never understood. I've been holding myself back for 5 years, trying to be the man you said you wanted. But that man was never real. He was just a role I played because I thought you were worth the performance. Dylan walked toward the door, pausing to look back at his wife one final time. Pack your things and get out. The house is in my name, the accounts are frozen, and your credit cards have been canceled. Your family's business is about to face some very difficult times, and your lover is going to prison for a very long time. Where am I supposed to go? Brianna asked desperately. Dylan's smile was arctic. That's not my problem anymore. You wanted someone better than a broke loser who can't provide? Now you can find out what it's like to have nothing at all. As he reached for the door handle, Brianna called out one last time. I'm sorry, Dylan. I'm so sorry. Can't we please try to work this out? Dylan paused, his hand on the door. For just a moment, she might have seen a flicker of the man she'd married. Then it was gone, replaced by something infinitely colder. Some things can't be worked out, Brianna. Some betrayals are unforgivable. And some people learn too late that actions have consequences. He walked out, leaving her alone in the house that was no longer hers, surrounded by the wreckage of a life she'd thrown away for a man who'd never loved her at all. The real work was just beginning. Chapter 5, The Network. Dylan's next stop was a nondescript office building downtown, the kind of place that housed accounting firms and insurance agencies. But on the third floor, behind a door marked Alpine Consulting, was the nerve center of an operation that most people would never suspect existed. Maria Santos looked up from her computer screens as Dylan entered. At 52, she was a former NSA analyst who'd grown tired of government bureaucracy and had joined Dylan's private network 3 years ago. Her ability to dig up information was legendary, and her loyalty was absolute. I heard about last night, she said without preamble. Carlos sent me the preliminary reports. How deep do you want to go? Dylan settled into a chair across from her desk, his expression grim. All the way. Every person who knew about the affair and said nothing. Every family member who participated in humiliating me. Everyone who thought they could treat me like a fool without consequences. Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard. I've already started background checks on the Walsh family. Richard's real estate business isn't as clean as it appears. There are some questionable land deals, a few partnerships with people who have interesting connections. What kind of connections? The kind that don't like publicity. Richard borrowed money from some very private lenders to finance his expansion last year. The terms were generous. Almost too generous. Dylan leaned forward, interested, which means they expect something in return. Exactly. And if their investment suddenly became a liability? Maria let the implication hang in the air. What about Patricia and Kevin? Patricia sits on several charity boards. Substantial money flows through those organizations, and the accounting isn't as transparent as it should be. Kevin's been trading on inside information from his father's real estate deals. Small-scale stuff, but enough to interest the SEC if someone pointed them in the right direction. Dylan absorbed this information, already formulating plans. I want comprehensive dossiers on everyone who was at that party. Cross-reference their financial records, personal histories, anything that could be used as leverage. Already in progress. But Dylan, Maria's expression grew serious. This isn't like our usual jobs. These people are connected to your personal life. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Your marriage is over, but your life as Dylan Torres, construction worker, is over too. That life ended last night, Dylan said firmly. Brianna and her family spent years treating me like I was beneath them. They thought they were safe because they believed I was harmless. It's time they learned better. Maria nodded and returned to her screens. There's something else you should know. I've been monitoring communications since last night. Trevor hired a lawyer, a good one. He's not going quietly. What's his strategy? He's claiming the evidence against him was obtained illegally. He's also making noise about filing charges against you for harassment and invasion of privacy. Dylan smiled coldly. Let him try. Everything we have on him was obtained through legal channels. And if he wants to escalate this to a legal battle, I have resources he can't imagine. As if summoned by their conversation, Dylan's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but he answered anyway. Dylan Torres. Mr. Torres, this is Jonathan Blackstone. I represent Trevor Hoffman. I think we need to talk. I don't think we do. My client is willing to make certain accommodations to resolve this situation quietly. Perhaps we could meet and discuss terms that would be mutually beneficial. Dylan put the phone on speaker so Maria could hear. Your client is in federal custody. I'm not sure what accommodations he thinks he can make. Mr. Hoffman has information that might be of interest to certain parties. Information that could make this entire situation disappear if handled correctly. Are you suggesting your client is willing to cooperate with federal investigators? There was a pause. I'm suggesting that Mr. Hoffman is a businessman who understands the value of negotiation. He's prepared to make significant concessions to avoid prolonged legal proceedings. Dylan looked at Maria, who was already pulling up additional files on her computer. Mr. Blackstone, tell your client that I'm not interested in negotiations. He made his choices when he decided to sleep with my wife. Now he can live with the consequences. Mr. Torres, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. My client has connections throughout the city's business community. His testimony could implicate a great many people in activities they prefer to keep private. Some of those people might view you as a threat to their interests. Is that a threat, counselor? It's a warning. My client is prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation, but that cooperation might lead to revelations that affect more than just Mr. Hoffman's business dealings. Dylan's smile was predatory. Mr. Blackstone, tell your client that if he thinks he can threaten me into backing down, he's about to discover exactly how wrong he is. And tell him that every time he opens his mouth to make a deal, I'll find new ways to make his life miserable. He hung up and looked at Maria. How quickly can we expand the investigation? What are you thinking? Trevor's lawyer just told us that he's connected to a broader network of corruption. If he wants to cooperate with investigators, let's give them so much evidence that his testimony becomes irrelevant. Maria's fingers were already flying across her keyboard. I'll need additional resources. This kind of comprehensive investigation requires more than just our usual contacts. Use whatever you need. Call in favors, hire specialists, bring in anyone who can help us map the entire network of corruption in this city. Dylan, that could take months and cost. I don't care what it costs. Dylan's voice was steel. These people thought they could humiliate me because I was nobody important. They're about to learn that the quiet man they ignored has the power to destroy everything they've built. As Dylan left the office, his phone buzzed with another message from Brianna. This one was different from the others, shorter, more desperate. Please call me. We need to talk. It's important. Dylan stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Brianna had had months to talk to him honestly. Now it was too late for conversation. The war had begun, and Dylan Torres intended to win it completely. Chapter 6, The Trap. 3 days after the anniversary party, Dylan received an unexpected visitor. He was reviewing financial documents in his home office when the doorbell rang. Through the security camera he'd installed after moving out his wife, he saw a woman he didn't recognize. Middle-aged, expensively dressed, with the kind of composed bearing that suggested either wealth or authority. When he opened the door, she introduced herself with a firm handshake. "Mr. Torres? I'm Catherine Reynolds. I represent certain interested parties who would like to discuss your recent activities." Dylan's military training kicked in immediately. Catherine Reynolds wasn't a lawyer. Her posture and the way her eyes cataloged his surroundings suggested intelligence or law enforcement background. But she wasn't official either, or she would have led with credentials. "I'm not sure what activities you're referring to," Dylan said carefully. "May I come in? This conversation would be better conducted privately." Dylan stepped aside, his mind racing through possibilities. Catherine entered and declined his offer of coffee, instead settling into a chair with the confident air of someone accustomed to being in control of conversations. "Mr. Torres, I represent a group of individuals who have significant investments in this city's development projects. Your actions regarding Trevor Hoffman have created some complications for our operations. Trevor's legal troubles are his own doing, of course, but the investigation you've triggered is expanding beyond Mr. Hoffman's personal indiscretions. Federal investigators are now examining land deals, permit processes, and financial relationships that have nothing to do with your marital problems." Dylan sat across from her, his expression neutral. "That sounds like a law enforcement issue, not my concern." Catherine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Torres, we know who you are. We know about your military background, your current consulting work, and your rather impressive network of contacts. We also know that you have the skills to make this situation either much better or much worse for everyone involved. I'm still not hearing a specific request. We'd like to hire you," Catherine said simply. "Your investigation has uncovered information that could be valuable to us. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for your cooperation and your discretion." Dylan leaned back, studying her. "And if I refuse, then we'd be forced to take other measures to protect our interests. Nothing unpleasant, you understand, but there are many ways to make someone's life complicated. It was a mistake." Catherine Reynolds had just threatened Dylan Torres, and she clearly didn't understand what that meant. "Ms. Reynolds," Dylan said quietly, "I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about this situation. I'm not trying to extort anyone or profit from information. I'm not interested in deals or accommodations. I'm destroying people who betrayed me, and I'm going to continue until I'm satisfied they've paid an appropriate price." Catherine's composure flickered slightly. "Mr. Torres, you're playing with forces beyond your understanding. The people I represent have resources and connections that what? Exceed mine." Dylan's smile was cold. "Ms. Reynolds, do you know what I did before I became a construction worker? Intelligence work, military consulting. We've done our research. Then you should know that I spent 8 years learning how to identify, infiltrate, and destroy organizations exactly like the one you represent. You should know that I have contacts and agencies that could make your employers' lives very interesting. And you should know that threatening me was the single stupidest thing you could have done." Dylan stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a thick folder. "This contains financial records, communication intercepts, and surveillance reports on a network of individuals involved in municipal corruption spanning the last 5 years. Your employers are prominently featured throughout." Catherine's face had gone pale. "How did you get this information?" "The same way I got everything else. While you and your people were assuming I was a harmless nobody, I was building a case that could destroy every person at every level of your organization." Dylan opened the folder and began laying out photographs on the coffee table between them. "Here's your boss meeting with city planning officials. Here's the cash exchange. Here's the falsified environmental impact report. Here's the shell company used to launder the bribes." With each photograph, Catherine seemed to shrink further into her chair. "But here's the interesting part," Dylan continued. "I wasn't initially interested in your organization. You weren't on my target list. But you just put yourselves there by coming to my house and threatening me. Mr. Torres, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. You came here to intimidate me into backing down. Instead, you've just declared war on someone who's very good at winning wars." Catherine stood abruptly, her professional composure finally cracking. You don't know what you're getting into. These people don't just make problems disappear. They make people disappear. Dylan's expression didn't change. Ms. Reynolds, I've made people disappear professionally. The difference is I was usually being paid to do it legally. Your employers won't have that luxury. As Catherine moved toward the door, Dylan called after her. Tell your bosses that they have 48 hours to withdraw all support from Trevor Hoffman and anyone else involved in my wife's deception. After that, the evidence I've gathered goes to every federal agency with jurisdiction. And if they refuse, Dylan's smile was genuinely terrifying. Then they'll discover exactly how creative I can be when people try to protect those who betrayed me. After Catherine left, Dylan immediately called Maria Santos. We have a problem, he said without preamble. The corruption network is bigger than we thought, and they just tried to intimidate me into backing down. How big? Big enough to send a professional negotiator to my house. Big enough to have federal investigations worried. Big enough to think they can threaten me and survive the consequences. Maria was quiet for a moment. Dylan, if these people are connected to organized crime or foreign interests, this could get very dangerous very quickly. Then we move faster. I want everything we have on every person connected to this network compiled and ready for distribution within 24 hours. Every financial crime, every illegal contact, every dirty deal. That's not enough time to verify everything properly. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be devastating. As Dylan hung up, he felt the familiar calm that came before major operations. Catherine Reynolds and her employers had made the same mistake as his wife and her family. They'd assumed he was someone they could manipulate or intimidate. They were about to learn better. Chapter 7. The Assault. The federal task force hit Trevor Hoffman's properties at dawn on Thursday morning, less than 48 hours after Catherine Reynolds had visited Dylan. The simultaneous raids on Trevor's office, his penthouse apartment, and his construction sites were coordinated with military precision, executed by agents who'd been given detailed intelligence about exactly where to look for evidence. Dylan watched the news coverage from Maria's office, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands as reporters described the largest municipal corruption investigation in decades. The evidence Dylan had provided had given federal investigators enough ammunition to secure warrants for dozens of locations and hundreds of financial records. Phase 1 complete, Maria said, monitoring multiple news feeds on her array of screens. Trevor's looking at minimum 20 years if convicted on all charges. His lawyer's already reaching out about a plea deal. What about the Reynolds organization? Radio silence since yesterday. Their legitimate businesses are operating normally, but the people you identified haven't been seen since Catherine visited you. Dylan nodded, unsurprised. Organizations like Catherine's didn't survive by fighting battles they couldn't win. They'd cut their losses and disappear, leaving Trevor and his associates to face the consequences alone. Sir, said Marcus Webb, Dylan's youngest operative, looking up from his computer. I've got movement on the Walsh family situation. Richards received 3 calls from his private lenders in the past hour. Apparently, news of his son-in-law's federal investigation has made them nervous about their investment. How nervous? Nervous enough to demand immediate repayment of his outstanding loans. We're talking about $12 million due within 30 days. Dylan allowed himself a small smile. Richard Walsh had spent years treating him like hired help, secure in his position as a successful businessman. Now he was about to discover how quickly success could turn to ruin when the wrong people decided you were a liability. What about Patricia and Kevin? Patricia's charity board memberships are under review. Apparently, someone filed anonymous complaints about financial irregularities with several oversight agencies. Kevin's stock trading has caught the SEC's attention. They're opening an investigation into possible insider trading violations. Excellent. Make sure the investigators have all the evidence they need to build solid cases. Dylan's phone rang, displaying Brianna's number. He'd been expecting this call since the raids began. Dylan, please. Brianna's voice was barely controlled panic. You have to stop this. My family is being destroyed. My father could lose everything. Your family destroyed themselves through their own actions, Dylan replied calmly. I'm just ensuring that the appropriate authorities are aware of those actions. Trevor never told me about any illegal activities. I had no idea. You had no idea because you were too busy planning your affair to pay attention to what kind of man you were sleeping with. Dylan, please. I know I hurt you, but this is going too far. My family has nothing to do with what happened between us. Dylan walked to the window, looking down at the city where so many lives were about to change forever. Your family had everything to do with it, Brianna. They enabled your betrayal. They encouraged it. They participated in humiliating me because they thought I was powerless to respond. They're facing prison, Dylan. My father, my brother, they could go to jail for years. They should have considered that before they decided to break the law. Just like you should have considered the consequences before you decided to break your marriage vows. There was a long silence before Brianna spoke again, her voice smaller now. What do you want from me? What can I do to make this stop? Dylan had been waiting for this question. There's nothing you can do, Brianna. This isn't about what I want anymore. This is about natural consequences. You made choices, your family made choices, and now everyone has to live with the results. I'll do anything. I'll leave town. I'll disappear. You'll do nothing, Dylan said firmly. You'll live with what you've done, and you'll watch as everything your family built crumbles around them. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew? Now you can experience that humiliation yourself. He ended the call and turned back to Maria and Marcus. Status on the media coverage? Comprehensive, Maria replied. Every major news outlet in the region is covering the corruption investigation. Trevor's name is linked to your wife's family in most reports. Social media is having a field day with the anniversary party revenge angle. Marcus looked up from his screen. Sir, I'm seeing some concerning chatter on encrypted channels. It looks like Catherine's people are regrouping. They might not be as willing to cut their losses as we hoped. Dylan's expression hardened. What kind of chatter? References to permanent solutions and removing complications. They seem to think you're a threat that needs to be eliminated. Good, Dylan said, surprising both his operatives. That means they're scared enough to make mistakes. Sir, Marcus, I want you to monitor all communications from that organization. If they're planning to move against me, I want to know about it before they act. Maria, begin phase 2 of the Walsh investigation. It's time to accelerate their financial collapse. What about security? Maria asked. If these people are talking about permanent solutions, let them try, Dylan said quietly. I've been waiting 5 years to show people who I really am. If Catherine's organization wants to escalate this to physical violence, they'll discover that they've made the worst mistake of their lives. As his team returned to their work, Dylan felt the familiar anticipation that came before complex operations. The legal destruction of his enemies was proceeding ahead of schedule, but the personal satisfaction would come from watching them realize exactly how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. The quiet construction worker they dismissed was about to remind everyone why it was dangerous to underestimate a man trained in the art of war. Chapter 8. The Execution. The attempt on Dylan's life came exactly when he expected it. Thursday night, as he returned home from dinner alone at the small diner where he'd eaten countless meals during his marriage. 2 men waited in the shadows of his driveway, professionals who moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this kind of work before. What they didn't expect was that Dylan had been watching them for the past hour through surveillance equipment he'd installed throughout his neighborhood. They also didn't expect him to come through the back door of his own house while they waited at the front. The confrontation was brief and decisive. Dylan's military training had never left him, and men who relied on intimidation and surprise were no match for someone who'd spent years learning to kill efficiently and quietly. When it was over, both attackers were unconscious, zip-tied, and sitting in Dylan's basement with hoods over their heads. Gentlemen, Dylan said conversationally as they came to consciousness, I appreciate your professionalism. Most people would have just tried to beat me up or threaten my family. You came here to kill me, which shows you understand the stakes. One of the men tried to speak through his hood, but Dylan ignored him. However, you've also just committed a federal crime by attempting to murder someone who's cooperating with an ongoing FBI investigation. Your employers have made what we call in the military a tactical error. Dylan pulled out his phone and showed them a video feed from his security cameras, clearly displaying their faces as they'd approached his house with weapons drawn. This footage is already uploaded to 3 separate secure servers and has been automatically forwarded to federal investigators. Even if you'd succeeded in killing me, you'd have been identified and arrested within hours. He removed their hoods, studying their faces with professional interest. Both men were in their 40s, former military based on their posture and scars, the kind of contractors who worked for organizations that needed problems solved quietly. Now, Dylan continued, you have a choice. You can maintain your loyalty to employers who sent you on a suicide mission, or you can cooperate with me and federal investigators in exchange for consideration in your sentencing. The larger of the 2 men finally spoke. We don't know anything about federal investigations. We were hired to deliver a message. Dylan smiled. By attempting to murder me? That's an interesting way to communicate. The message was that you should stop interfering in other people's business. And who exactly sent this message? The men exchanged glances, clearly debating how much to reveal. Dylan decided to help them make the decision. Let me save you some time, he said, pulling out a tablet and showing them photographs of Catherine Reynolds and several associates. These are the people who hired you. I know their names, their addresses, their financial records, and their operational methods. I know they represent a network of foreign investors who've been using municipal corruption to launder money through real estate development. Both men stared at the photographs in obvious recognition. What you don't know, Dylan continued, is that I spent 8 years working for organizations that specialized in dismantling networks exactly like this one. Your employers aren't the first group of criminals I've destroyed, and they won't be the last. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But here's what makes this personal. Your employers got involved in my business because they thought they could protect Trevor Hoffman, the man who was sleeping with my wife. They made my revenge their problem, which means they're now going to experience the full extent of what I'm capable of. One of the contractors, apparently the smarter of the 2, seemed to understand the implications. What do you want from us? Everything. Names, addresses, operational procedures, financial arrangements. I want to know how their organization works, who they answer to, and how they've been operating in this city. And if we cooperate, then I'll make sure federal prosecutors know about your cooperation when they're deciding how many years to request at your sentencing. And if we don't, Dylan's expression became glacial. Then you'll discover that there are fates worse than federal prison. Your employers sent you to kill me because they thought I was a threat. They have no idea how right they were. Over the next several hours, Dylan methodically extracted everything the contractors knew about Catherine Reynolds' organization. The picture that emerged was even worse than he'd suspected. A network of foreign nationals using American real estate markets to launder hundreds of millions of dollars, with corruption reaching into state government and federal agencies. By dawn, Dylan had enough information to destroy not just Catherine's immediate organization, but the entire network they represented. He also had 2 federal contractors willing to testify in exchange for reduced sentences and surveillance footage that would make prosecution of the attempted murder case straightforward. As he prepared to contact his federal liaison, Dylan's phone rang with a call from an unknown international number. Mr. Torres? The voice was accented, precise, and coldly professional. I believe you have something that belongs to me. I have 2 employees who failed to complete their assignment, Dylan replied. If that's what you're referring to. Among other things, I think we should meet and discuss terms for their return. I don't negotiate with people who try to have me killed. Mr. Torres, you have interfered with business arrangements worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You have cost us valuable assets and operational security. Surely you understand that such actions require consequences. Dylan's smile was predatory. Oh, I understand consequences perfectly. Your organization is about to experience a comprehensive education on the subject. I think you misunderstand your position. We know where you live, where you work, who your friends are. We can make your life very unpleasant very quickly. Actually, Dylan said, looking at the information he'd extracted from the contractors, I think you misunderstand your position. I now know where all of you live, how your organization operates, and exactly how to dismantle it piece by piece. Mr. Torres. No, Dylan interrupted. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. You became my enemy when you tried to protect Trevor Hoffman. You escalated to warfare when you sent people to kill me. Now you're going to discover what happens when you threaten someone who's better at this than you are. Dylan ended the call and immediately began implementing phase 3 of his revenge plan. Catherine Reynolds and her organization had made the mistake of thinking they were dealing with a small-time operator seeking personal revenge. They were about to learn that they declared war on someone who'd been trained to fight much larger battles, and who'd never lost one yet. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. 6 months after the anniversary party that changed everything, Dylan Torres stood in the courtroom as the final sentences were handed down. Trevor Hoffman received 25 years in federal prison. Richard Walsh got 15 years for racketeering and tax evasion. Kevin Walsh received 8 years for securities fraud. Patricia Walsh was sentenced to 5 years for money laundering through her charitable organizations. The federal investigation had expanded far beyond anyone's initial expectations, ultimately bringing down a network of criminals that stretched across 3 states and involved over $200 million in illegal transactions. Catherine Reynolds and her associates had been arrested trying to flee the country, facing charges that would keep them in prison for the rest of their lives. But for Dylan, the legal victories were secondary to the personal satisfaction of watching his enemies realize exactly how thoroughly they'd been destroyed. Brianna sat in the public gallery, a shadow of the woman who'd once thought herself untouchable. Her family's wealth was gone, seized by federal authorities or lost to legal fees. Her social standing had evaporated the moment her affair became public. Her lover was in prison, her family was disgraced, and she was facing her own criminal charges for inadvertently helping to launder money through properties Trevor had purchased for their meetings. As the court session ended, Brianna approached Dylan in the hallway. She looked older, worn down by months of stress and public humiliation. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked quietly. Dylan studied her face, noting the absence of the arrogance that had once defined her. "I'm satisfied that justice has been served." "Justice?" Brianna laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my entire family over an affair. Was your pride really worth all this?" "This was never about pride," Dylan replied. "This was about consequences. You and your family spent years treating me like I was beneath you. You thought you could humiliate me publicly because you believed I was powerless to respond. You were wrong. I made a mistake. One mistake, and you destroyed dozens of lives." Dylan's expression remained impassive. "You made hundreds of mistakes, Brianna. Every lie, every deception, every moment you looked me in the eye and pretended we had a marriage worth saving. Your family made their own mistakes when they broke federal laws to increase their wealth. Trevor made his mistakes when he chose to prey on married women while running criminal enterprises. Brianna tried one last time to reach the man she'd once married. Dylan, please. I know I hurt you, but this has gone too far. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me? Can't we try to rebuild something from all this destruction?" Dylan looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the woman he'd once loved, but the stranger who betrayed everything he believed in. "Some things can't be rebuilt, Brianna. Some betrayals are unforgivable. You wanted to know who you married? Now you know. I'm someone who never forgets, never forgives, and never loses." As he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the courthouse hallway, Dylan felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since his military days. The operation was over, the objectives achieved, the enemies neutralized. His phone buzzed with a message from Maria Santos. New job offer just came in. International scope, significant challenge. Interested? Dylan smiled as he typed his response. "Send me the details." The construction worker facade was no longer necessary. Dylan Torres had reminded the world exactly who he was, and there were other enemies, other wrongs to right, other battles to win. As he drove away from the courthouse, Dylan caught a glimpse of Brianna in his rearview mirror, still standing alone on the courthouse steps. She'd wanted someone better than the man she'd married. She'd gotten exactly what she deserved instead. The quiet man who'd been dismissed as a broke loser had proven that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones you never see coming. Dylan Torres was done pretending to be someone he wasn't, done holding back his true capabilities out of love for people who'd never deserved his protection. The world was full of Trevor Hoffmans and Catherine Reynolds, people who thought they could prey on others without consequences. Dylan had found his new purpose in life, teaching them exactly how wrong they were. Some lessons, he discovered, were best taught with absolute ruthlessness. And Dylan Torres was a very good teacher. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Documentary Man. Calvin Payne had learned to read people during his 8 years in military intelligence. Body language, micro-expressions, the tiny hesitations before a lie. They were his native language. So when his wife Brittany started touching her left earring every time she spoke to him, he knew something had shifted. The irony wasn't lost on him. He left the army at 29, tired of hunting threats in foreign countries, wanting to build something meaningful. Documentary filmmaking seemed like the perfect transition, still investigating, still uncovering truths, but without the body bags. His work had gained critical acclaim. 3 films exposing corruption in various industries, each one meticulously researched and devastatingly effective. That's how he'd met Brittany Thornton 5 years ago. She'd approached him at a gallery opening in Manhattan, all glossy black hair and practiced charm, praising his latest documentary about pharmaceutical fraud. "You have a gift for revealing what people hide," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. He'd missed that detail then, too dazzled by her beauty and apparent interest. The Thornton family owned Thornton Industries, a sprawling empire built on real estate, pharmaceuticals, and what they called international logistics. Calvin had done basic research before proposing, nothing deeper than any reasonable person would do. The Thorntons were wealthy, influential, with the kind of pristine public image that came from expensive PR firms and generous donations to museums and hospitals. He should have looked harder. Now, sitting in the breakfast room of the Thornton estate in Westchester County, Calvin watched his 3-year-old daughter Emma push Cheerios around her bowl, making motor sounds. Her dark curls, inherited from Brittany, bounced as she moved. Everything good in his life was sitting across from him in pink pajamas. "Daddy, airplane." Emma held up a piece of cereal. "That's right, sweetheart. Want to hear a secret?" Calvin leaned inconspiratorially. "Tomorrow, we're going on a real airplane ride. A helicopter, actually." Emma's eyes went huge. "Really? Really? Grandpa Anthony wants to show us his new helicopter." Calvin kept his voice light, though his instincts screamed warnings he couldn't yet decipher. Brittany walked in, phone pressed to her ear, already dressed in a cream Chanel suit despite the early hour. She glanced at Emma, then Calvin, her expression as warm as marble. "I have to go into the city. Mother wants me there for the charity luncheon." "I thought we were spending the day together," Calvin said mildly. "Plans change, Calvin." She touched her left earring. "You understand." He understood plenty. Over the past 6 months, Brittany had grown distant, cold. She'd moved into a separate bedroom, claiming Emma's nighttime crying disturbed her sleep. She'd started taking calls that made her leave the room. She'd look at Calvin sometimes with something approaching contempt, quickly masked when she remembered to play the role. Most telling, she'd updated her life insurance and asked Calvin to do the same, increasing his policy to $5 million with her as the sole beneficiary. When he questioned it, she'd laughed. "We have a child, Calvin. These things matter." His intelligence background had taught him to document everything. For 3 months, he'd been quietly collecting evidence of something. Brittany's late-night phone calls, her father Annie's frequent business trips to Colombia and Myanmar, the way the family's pharmaceutical division shipped products through routes that made no economic sense, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. And then, 2 weeks ago, the real breakthrough, A flash drive left carelessly in Antony's study. Calvin had been looking for a book, found something far more valuable. Financial records, shipping manifests, codenames, and routes. The Thornton family wasn't just in pharmaceuticals. They were moving something else entirely, using their legitimate business as cover. Calvin had made copies, encrypted them, sent them to 3 different secure locations. Because that's what intelligence training taught you. Always have insurance, always have an exit strategy. Enjoy your luncheon, Calvin told Brittany, kissing Emma's head. We'll be here when you get back. Brittany's eyes flicked to him, sharp and assessing. Actually, I'll be back tomorrow morning. The helicopter tour is scheduled for 10 a.m. Don't be late. After she left, Calvin sat in silence, listening to Emma's airplane sounds. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Hood, his old Army intelligence partner, who transitioned to private security work. Marcus, you still want to go through with this? Calvin, tomorrow. Stick to the plan. Marcus, roger that. Watch your 6, brother. Calvin pocketed the phone and smiled at his daughter. Come on, Emma Bear. Let's go to the park. As they left the Thornton estate, Calvin didn't look back at the mansion looming behind them. By this time tomorrow, everything would be different. Either he'd be free with his daughter, or they'd both be dead. He was betting everything on option 1. Chapter 2, The Family Business. That evening, Calvin received a summons to Antony Thornton's private study, a wood-paneled sanctum where the patriarch conducted his real business. Calvin had been in this room exactly 3 times during his 5-year marriage. Each visit had been brief, uncomfortable, making it clear he was an outsider tolerating on the family sufferance. Antony sat behind a massive desk, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit custom-tailored to hide the beginning of a paunch. At 68, he carried himself like a man who'd never heard the word no and didn't intend to start. Kimberly Thornton, Brittany's mother, stood by the window, her thin frame draped in designer silk. She had the same cold beauty as her daughter, but aged into something brittle and sharp. Calvin, sit. Antony gestured to the chair facing his desk, the supplicant's position. Calvin sat, keeping his posture relaxed, his face neutral. What's this about? Tomorrow's flight, Antony said, pressing his fingertips together. I wanted to discuss something with you privately. Man to man. I'm listening. You've been married to my daughter for 5 years. In that time, you've continued your documentary work, your investigations. Antony's smile didn't waver. Admirable, in its way. You have principles. Thank you. However, Kimberly interjected, her voice like ice water. Principles can be inconvenient, particularly when they lead a man to look into matters that don't concern him. Calvin's pulse quickened, but his expression remained unchanged. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't insult us. Antony's smile vanished. 2 weeks ago, someone accessed my computer. Files were copied. I know it was you, Calvin. You're the only one with both the skills and the stupidity to try. Strong accusations require strong evidence. When not in court, Antony leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, during our helicopter tour, you're going to give me the locations of every copy of those files. You're going to provide all passwords, all access codes, and then you're going to sign a contract agreeing never to speak of what you saw. And if I refuse? Kimberly laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Then Emma grows up without a father. Accidents happen, Calvin, particularly around helicopters. The threat hung in the air between them. Calvin processed it, his mind racing through scenarios. They'd just confirmed everything he'd suspected. They were willing to kill him. They'd use the helicopter. I need time to think, Calvin said carefully. You have until tomorrow morning. Antony stood, signaling the conversation was over. 10 a.m., Calvin. Don't disappoint us. You wouldn't want Emma to lose both parents. The words sent ice through Calvin's veins. What does that mean? It means, Brittany said, entering the study from a side door. How long had she been listening? That I'm tired of this charade. I married you because father needed someone clean, someone respectable, to polish the family image. The war hero turned documentarian, fighting for truth and justice. She laughed bitterly. You were perfect cover, but you become a liability. Calvin looked at his wife, really looked at her. You never loved me. Love. Brittany's expression was pure contempt. You were a tool, Calvin. A useful idiot. And now you're just an idiot who knows too much. And Emma. For just a moment, something flickered in Brittany's eyes. Then it was gone. Emma is a Thornton. She'll be raised properly, without your middle-class morality holding her back. Calvin stood slowly. I want to see the helicopter before tomorrow. Make sure it's safe for Emma. Anthony's eyes narrowed. Suspicious, aren't we? Careful, Calvin corrected. I'm a father first. I want to inspect the helicopter. Tonight. The Thorntons exchanged glances. Anthony shrugged. Fine. Marcus will take you to the hangar. He's piloting tomorrow anyway. See for yourself. It's perfectly safe. Calvin nodded and left the study, his mind already 3 steps ahead. They'd confirmed the method, the helicopter. They'd confirmed the intent, his death, possibly Emma's. They'd confirmed they saw him as a threat to be eliminated. What they hadn't confirmed was his own preparation. At the private hangar 30 minutes later, Calvin found the sleek black helicopter gleaming under industrial lights. And, standing beside it, doing a pre-flight check, was Marcus Hood. Marcus looked every inch the professional pilot and security contractor. Buzz-cut, aviator sunglasses despite the indoor setting, broad shoulders filling out his flight suit. He'd been Calvin's right hand in Afghanistan, the one person Calvin trusted absolutely. Evening, sir, Marcus said formally for anyone listening. Here to inspect the aircraft? That's right. Calvin walked around the helicopter, running his hands along the fuselage. To any observer, he was a concerned father checking safety. In reality, he and Marcus were confirming the final details of tomorrow's plan. Marcus opened the side door. As you can see, all safety equipment is in place. Parachutes in the rear compartment. He paused meaningfully, though they'd be difficult for a civilian to access in an emergency. Calvin climbed inside, examining the interior. The passenger compartment was spacious, with facing bench seats and large sliding doors on each side. Easy enough to push someone out. His jaw tightened. And the flight path? Calvin asked. Mr. Thornton wants to fly over the Hudson Valley. Beautiful views. We'll reach a cruising altitude of about 15,000 feet. Marcus handed him a tablet showing the route. Weather's perfect tomorrow. Clear skies. 15,000 feet. Fatal altitude for a fall. Calvin studied the tablet, memorizing the route, then looked at Marcus. In his old friend's eyes, he saw grim determination. Marcus knew what was coming. They both did. Looks good, Calvin said loudly. Then, dropping his voice to barely a whisper, You're sure about the switch? Marcus nodded fractionally. Dominic Strickland was supposed to pilot. I convinced Anthony I was more qualified. Strickland's pissed, but he'll be on the ground. Dominic Strickland, the Thornton family's head of security, former mercenary, and according to Calvin's research, a man with 17 kills to his name, none of them sanctioned by any legitimate military. Of course, he'd been the original choice. Thank you, brother, Calvin whispered. Thank me when we're both on the ground alive, Marcus muttered back. Then, louder. Any questions, sir? Just one. Calvin met his eyes. If something goes wrong tomorrow, if they somehow push Emma and me out, what are our chances? Marcus's expression didn't change. From 15,000 feet? Without a parachute. He paused. Nobody survives that fall, sir. Nobody. Calvin nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He left the hangar, got in his car, and drove not back to the Thornton estate, but to a storage unit 40 miles away. Inside, he'd spent the past 2 weeks assembling his insurance policy. 3 copies of the Thornton files, ready to be sent to the FBI, the DEA, and the Washington Post. 1 small, emergency parachute, civilian model, rated for low-altitude deployment, designed for base jumping. It wouldn't be comfortable at 15,000 feet, and using it would be dangerous as hell, but it was better than nothing. 1 specialized harness designed to secure an adult and small child together. 1 encrypted phone with pre-programmed messages ready to send. And 1 waterproof case containing medical supplies, his daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit, and a letter explaining everything, just in case. Calvin packed everything into a small backpack, slim enough to wear under a jacket. He practiced deploying the harness one more time, checking every strap, every buckle. Then he sat in the storage unit's harsh fluorescent light and thought about his daughter's laugh. Tomorrow, the Thorntons would try to kill them. Tomorrow, Calvin would let them think they'd succeeded. And then, when they thought themselves safe, he'd destroy them so completely they'd wish they'd never heard his name. He'd spent 8 years in intelligence learning to dismantle networks, expose secrets, and bring down criminals who thought themselves untouchable. The Thorntons were about to learn what happened when you threatened a father who knew how to fight back. Chapter 3, 15,000 feet. The morning dawned clear and cold, perfect flying weather. Calvin dressed Emma in warm layers, hiding the specialized child harness underneath her pink jacket. She didn't question it, too excited about the helicopter ride to notice the unusual clothing. "Daddy, will we see clouds?" Emma bounced on her feet. "Maybe, sweetheart. We'll definitely see birds." Calvin zipped his own jacket, concealing the parachute pack. It was uncomfortable, bulky, but his outer jacket covered it well enough. To anyone watching, he just looked layered against the cold. Brittany appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Ready, ready," Calvin confirmed. The drive to the hangar was silent. Brittany stared out the window, occasionally checking her phone. Emma chattered about clouds and birds and whether they'd see her school from the sky. Calvin memorized every detail of his daughter's face, every inflection of her voice. At the hangar, Anthony and Kimberly waited beside the helicopter. Marcus stood by the pilot's door, professional and silent. Dominic Strickland lurked nearby, his face twisted with barely concealed anger at being replaced. "Calvin, Emma." Anthony's smile was all teeth. "Ready for the adventure of a lifetime?" "You have no idea how right you are," Calvin thought, but smiled back. "Absolutely." They boarded, Anthony and Kimberly on one bench, Calvin and Emma facing them. Brittany slid the door closed and sat beside her parents. The seating arrangement was strategic, Calvin noted. 3 Thorntons on one side, their 2 targets on the other. Maximum leverage for pushing them out. Marcus started the engine. The rotors began to spin, building to a deafening whine. Emma pressed against Calvin, half excited, half scared. He held her close, whispering reassurances. The helicopter lifted smoothly, rising above the hangar, above the trees, climbing into the crystalline morning sky. The Hudson Valley spread below them, forests ablaze with autumn color, the river winding like a silver ribbon, distant mountains purple against the horizon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Anthony shouted over the engine noise. "Breathtaking," Calvin agreed. They climbed higher, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 12,000. Calvin felt the air thinning, felt Emma's grip tighten on his jacket. He checked his watch. They'd been airborne for 18 minutes. According to the flight plan, they should be nearing cruising altitude. 15,000 feet. Anthony's smile vanished. He reached under his seat and pulled out a pistol. "Now," he roared. Everything happened in seconds. Kimberly grabbed Emma, trying to wrench her from Calvin's arms. Brittany lunged for the door release. The helicopter banked sharply, Marcus's signal. Calvin's training kicked in. He twisted, pulling Emma against his chest, activating the hidden harness clasps. They snapped together with satisfying clicks. Emma was now secured to him, unable to be separated. "What?" Kimberly stumbled back. Calvin hit Anthony's wrist, sending the gun skittering across the floor. Then he pulled Emma toward the still-closed door, deliberately putting himself in position. "You want to do this?" Calvin shouted. "Let's do it." Brittany laughed, high and manic. She yanked the door open. Wind screamed into the cabin, violent and freezing. "Say goodbye, Calvin." Anthony recovered the gun, his face purple with rage. Nobody survives a fall from 15,000 feet. He pointed the weapon at Calvin's chest, then pulled the trigger. Calvin challenged. For a moment, Anthony hesitated. Shooting was one thing, but they needed this to look like an accident. That hesitation was all Calvin needed. He lunged backward toward the open door. Emma clutched against him. Brittany grabbed his jacket, trying to push. Kimberly screamed, something lost in the wind. And Anthony fired. The bullet went wide, punching through the fuselage. And in that instant of chaos, Calvin felt hands, Brittany's hands, shoving him hard. They tumbled out of the helicopter. The world became a nightmare of spinning sky and plummeting earth. Wind tore at them with brutal force. Emma screamed against his chest. 15,000 feet below, the ground rushed up to meet them. Calvin fought for control, spreading his limbs, stabilizing their fall. He could see the helicopter above them, already shrinking. Through the open door, he glimpsed Brittany's face, laughing, triumphant. "Splatter like the mistake you are." Her voice barely reached him, torn away by wind. 5 Mississippi. 6 Mississippi. 7 Mississippi. Calvin counted, waiting for the helicopter to gain distance, waiting for the right altitude. Emma's screams had faded to terrified whimpers. He held her tight, whispering prayers he'd forgotten he knew. 10 Mississippi. He pulled the ripcord. The parachute deployed with a violent jerk, nearly tearing them apart. But the harness held. Emma gasped as their fall slowed from fatal to merely dangerous. The ground was still coming fast, too fast. This wasn't a normal skydiving chute. It was an emergency base jumping rig designed for low-altitude deployment. At 15,000 feet, it was barely adequate. Calvin grabbed the steering toggles, aiming for a clearing he'd spotted during their endless fall. Trees rushed past, getting closer. He could see individual leaves now, branches, the glint of a stream. They hit the tree canopy at 20 miles per hour. Branches clawed at them, tearing clothes, scraping skin. Calvin wrapped himself around Emma, taking the impacts. They crashed through 2 layers of branches before the parachute snagged on a massive oak. They jerked to a stop, hanging 30 feet above the ground. For a long moment, Calvin just breathed. Emma was crying, but alive. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, but alive. They were alive. "It's okay, baby," he gasped. "We're okay. Daddy's got you." He looked up. Through gaps in the canopy, he could see the helicopter circling back, coming lower. They'd seen the parachute. They knew. Good, Calvin thought grimly. Let them come closer. Let them see. Marcus brought the helicopter to a hover above the trees. Calvin could see faces in the open door. Anthony's shock, Kimberly's horror, and Brittany. Brittany screamed, because she just recognized the pilot. Marcus Hood, Calvin's friend, his brother from the army, the man who'd been briefed on every detail of Calvin's plan, gave her a small salute. Then he banked the helicopter away, heading not back to the Thornton hangar, but to a private airfield 40 miles north, where FBI agents were already waiting with warrants. In the helicopter, the Thorntons would be trapped. Their pilot was now their captor. And in approximately 7 hours, when paramedics reached Calvin and Emma's position, exactly as planned, using the GPS tracker in Calvin's phone, the authorities would find 2 survivors with one hell of a story to tell. Calvin used his remaining strength to lower them safely to the ground using the parachute lines. Emma was sobbing, but unharmed beyond bruises and scratches. He held her close, checking her over, thanking every deity he could name that she was alive. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Package delivered. Birds in cage. Your move, brother. Calvin allowed himself a small smile. The Thorntons thought they'd won. They'd spent the flight back to that airfield laughing about his death, about how they'd spin the tragic accident, about how Brittany would collect the life insurance. Right up until Marcus landed at an FBI facility and agents swarmed the helicopter. Now came Phase 2, the complete and total destruction of everything the Thorntons had built. Calvin had 7 hours to rest, to hold his daughter, to gather his strength. Because when those paramedics arrived and the media storm began, he'd need to be ready for the performance of his lifetime. The Thorntons had pushed him out of a helicopter at 15,000 feet. They were about to learn that some falls are survivable, and some mistakes are fatal. Chapter 4. The Survivor's Tale. 7 hours later, as planned, paramedics hiked into the woods, following the GPS coordinates from Calvin's emergency beacon. They found him conscious, bleeding from multiple lacerations, holding his daughter, who'd somehow escaped serious injury. The scene was perfect, dramatic, sympathetic, undeniable. The media exploded. By the time Calvin was loaded into the ambulance, News helicopters circled overhead. By the time he reached the hospital, reporters packed the parking lot. And by the time FBI agents arrived to take his statement, the story had gone national. War hero survives murder attempt by billionaire in-laws. Documentary filmmaker and daughter pushed from helicopter at 15,000 feet. Thornton family arrested after failed murder for hire. Calvin spent 3 days in the hospital, mostly for observation. Emma stayed with him, sleeping in his bed, refusing to leave his side. Child psychologists came and went, concerned about trauma. But Emma was resilient, and she'd been unconscious for most of the fall, Calvin's body shielding her from the worst of it. During those 3 days, Calvin gave carefully crafted statements to law enforcement. He showed them the copies he'd made of the Thornton files, evidence of drug trafficking, money laundering, connections to cartels in 3 countries. He explained his discovery, his fear, the threats made in Antony's study. But he didn't tell them everything. Some cards he kept close to his chest. On the 4th day, his lawyer and old college friend Hayden Ray arrived, a sharp-dressed man with wire-rimmed glasses and a photographic memory that had made him a legend in Manhattan legal circles. "You magnificent bastard," Hayden said, closing the hospital room door behind him. "You actually did it." "Did what?" Calvin asked innocently. Emma was napping. Finally, curled up with her stuffed rabbit. "Survived. Got evidence. Got them arrested. Got national attention. Got." Hayden pulled out his tablet. 17 interview requests from major networks, 43 from newspapers and magazines, and a book deal offer for mid-7 figures. Not interested in any of it. "I figured." Hayden sat down, his expression turning serious. "Calvin, what you did was insane. You let them push you out of a helicopter. Had to make it real. Had to make sure they couldn't claim it was staged or fabricated. You could have died, but I didn't." Calvin looked at his sleeping daughter. "And now they can't hurt us anymore. The FBI has them on attempted murder, drug trafficking, and about 15 other charges. The DA thinks he can get life sentences for all 3. Hayden paused. "But here's the thing. Their lawyers are already working damage control. The Thorntons have money, connections, and the best legal team money can buy." "Not good enough," Calvin said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, prison isn't enough." Calvin turned to face his friend. "I want them destroyed, Hayden. Completely. Their business, their reputation, their legacy. I want it all turned to ash." Hayden studied him carefully. "What did you have in mind? The files I gave the FBI? Those are just the tip. I have more. Much more." Calvin pulled out a USB drive from under his pillow. Financial records going back 20 years. Communications with cartel leaders. Videos of meetings. And most importantly, evidence of who else is involved. Who? Judges. Politicians. Police chiefs. The Thorntons bought themselves a protection network. That's how they've operated for decades. Calvin's voice was cold. "I'm going to expose all of it. Every corrupt official, every paid-off cop, every politician in their pocket. By the time I'm done, the Thornton name will be synonymous with organized crime." Hayden whistled low. That's nuclear, Calvin. They tried to murder my daughter." "Fair point." Hayden took the USB drive. "What do you need from me?" "2 things. First, keep the FBI and media off my back while I recover. I need time to work." "Done." "And second, help me contact Elsa Shaw." Hayden's eyes widened. Elsa Shaw was an investigative journalist with the New York Times, famous for her Pulitzer-winning expose that had brought down 3 senators and a Fortune 500 CEO. She was relentless, thorough, and absolutely incorruptible. "You want to go public with everything. I want to bury them so deep they'll never see daylight again," Calvin confirmed. "Can you reach her? For a story like this? She'll be on the next plane." Hayden was right. Elsa Shaw arrived the next morning. A woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair, sharp brown eyes, and a recording device that was never off. She listened to Calvin's story for 4 hours straight, occasionally asking clarifying questions, taking notes with the speed of a court stenographer. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "If even half of this checks out, it's the biggest story of the decade." "All of it checks out," Calvin assured her. "I spent 3 months verifying everything before I made my move." "Your move?" Elsa smiled slightly. You let them try to kill you to prove their intent. I needed them to commit, to show their true nature. Otherwise, it's my word against a wealthy family's lawyers. You're either brilliant or insane. Both, probably. Calvin poured her more coffee. Can you run the story? Not just one story. This is a series. Minimum 6 articles, probably more. I'll need time to investigate, verify sources, contact the people named in these files for comment. How long? 3 weeks. Maybe 4. Make it 3, Calvin said. The Thorntons' lawyers are already building their defense. I want your story to drop right before their preliminary hearing. Elsa's smile widened. Maximum impact. I like it. She stood, gathering her materials. One question, though. Why go through me? Why not just hand everything to the FBI and let them handle it? Because the FBI will prosecute the Thorntons for specific crimes. But you? Calvin met her eyes. You'll destroy their entire legacy. You'll make sure everyone knows what they really are. Prison eventually ends. Public disgrace is forever. You're more ruthless than I expected from a documentary filmmaker. I learned from the best, Calvin said quietly. During my intelligence days, I watched how we destroyed terrorist networks. You don't just arrest the leaders. You dismantle the infrastructure, expose the collaborators, destroy the narrative. The Thorntons are a criminal network. I'm going to dismantle them the same way. Elsa nodded slowly. 3 weeks. I'll have a story ready. After she left, Calvin picked up Emma and carried her to the window. The media circus was still outside, but hospital security kept them at bay. His phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, social media mentions, messages of support. Hayden, Dominic Strickland, just made bail. Thought you should know. Calvin's jaw tightened. Dominic Strickland, the Thornton family's enforcer, the man who'd been supposed to pilot the helicopter, the man with 17 kills to his name. He'd been arrested as an accessory to attempted murder, but with the Thornton lawyers fighting hard in creative bail arguments, a judge had let him out, which meant Calvin had a new problem. Strickland was dangerous, loyal to the Thorntons, and now had every reason to want revenge. Calvin put security on Emma and me. Now, Hayden, already done. Former Secret Service, best in the business. They're outside your room right now. Calvin relaxed slightly. He'd anticipated this, planned for it, but knowing Strickland was out there, hunting, made his skin crawl. His phone buzzed again, Marcus Hood this time. Marcus, heard Strickland made bail. Wanting to handle it? Calvin, no. Legal only. We're not criminals. Marcus, your call, but watch your back. Strickland's not the type to forgive and forget. Calvin knew, which is why he'd already set his next trap. Chapter 5. The Enforcer's Mistake. Dominic Strickland was many things, killer, mercenary, thug, but he wasn't stupid. He knew Calvin Payne had orchestrated everything, from the file theft to the helicopter setup. And he knew that unless he acted fast, the Thorntons would go down and take him with them. Calvin learned of Strickland's intentions from a surprising source. Nellie Kerr, the Thorntons' former housekeeper, who'd been quietly documenting the family's crimes for 3 years and had finally found the courage to come forward. Mr. Strickland came to the house yesterday, Nellie told Calvin during a secret meeting arranged by Hayden. He was shouting at Mrs. Thornton, said the only way to fix this was to eliminate the witness. He meant you. Calvin absorbed this information calmly. What did Brittany say? She told him to wait. Said they had lawyers working on it. Nellie twisted her hands nervously. But Mr. Strickland, he's not the waiting type. I heard him on the phone after. He was hiring people. Professional people. Assassins. Yes. Nellie's voice dropped to a whisper. He said he'd have it done within a week. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Calvin thanked Nellie and sent her to FBI protection. Then he made a phone call to an old intelligence contact named Wallace Moore, now a private investigator specializing in surveillance and counter-surveillance. I need eyes on Dominic Strickland, Calvin explained. Round the clock. I need to know everyone he meets, everything he does. Expensive, Wallace warned. I can afford it. The Thorntons' attempt on his life had actually improved Calvin's financial situation. His documentary work was suddenly in high demand. He had book deals pending, and a GoFundMe, started by supporters, had raised $300,000 for Emma's future. Dark irony. Wallace worked fast. Within 48 hours, Calvin had detailed reports. Strickland had indeed hired two men, Lupe Montez and Clyde Lambert, both former cartel enforcers now freelancing in the murder-for-hire business. They were planning to hit Calvin at his temporary apartment in 3 days, making it look like a home invasion. "Perfect," Calvin said, studying the surveillance photos. "Here's what I need you to do." Instead of warning the police, Calvin set a different trap. He leaked through anonymous channels that he'd be transferring certain sensitive documents to the FBI on the night of the planned hit. Documents that would allegedly implicate even more Thornton associates, including several dirty cops who'd been helping them. The leak was intentional bait. If Strickland thought Calvin had evidence that could bring down corrupt law enforcement, he'd have no choice but to accelerate the timeline and try to steal the documents. Calvin wasn't at the apartment the night of the hit. Neither was Emma. They were safely in FBI protective custody. But the apartment wasn't empty. Inside, waiting in the dark, was an FBI strike team that had been very interested to hear about a murder-for-hire plot involving two known cartel associates and a man already on bail for attempted murder. When Montez and Lambert kicked in the door, they walked into a wall of federal agents with guns drawn and cameras rolling. And Strickland, who'd been foolish enough to meet them nearby to coordinate the hit, was arrested 2 blocks away with incriminating texts on his phone and a bag containing $50,000 in cash, the first half of the payment. The arrests made national news. More importantly, they destroyed the Thorntons' remaining credibility. Their lawyers' claims that the helicopter incident was a tragic misunderstanding became laughably impossible to sustain when their head of security was caught hiring hitmen to finish the job. "Checkmate," Hayden said, watching the news coverage in Calvin's new secure apartment. "Strickland just buried them." "Not yet," Calvin said. "But soon." In jail, Dominic Strickland realized he was facing life imprisonment. His loyalty to the Thorntons lasted approximately 48 hours before he started talking to prosecutors, offering testimony in exchange for a plea deal. The stories he told were damning. Murders ordered by Anthony, bribes paid by Kimberly, drug shipments personally overseen by Brittany. He provided dates, locations, witnesses. He corroborated everything in Calvin's files and added new details prosecutors hadn't known. The DA's case went from strong to ironclad. But Calvin wasn't satisfied with just a criminal conviction. He wanted total annihilation. Chapter 6: The Empire Falls. 3 weeks after the helicopter incident, Elsa Shaw's first article dropped in the New York Times. The Thornton Files: How the Pharmaceutical Empire Hid a Drug Cartel. The article was devastating. Meticulously researched, carefully sourced, and absolutely damning. Elsa had verified every claim, contacted every person named, and built an irrefutable case that the Thornton family had been running drugs through their pharmaceutical company for over 2 decades. But that was just part 1. Part 2 ran the next day. Bought Justice. The Thornton family's web of corruption. This one named names. Judges. Politicians. Police chiefs. Elsa had used Calvin's files plus her own investigation to map the entire protection network. She showed bank transfers, recorded conversations, emails discussing arrangements. She showed how the Thorntons had systematically corrupted an entire region's justice system. By part 3, heads were rolling. Judges resigned. 2 politicians announced they wouldn't seek re-election. A police chief was arrested. The governor ordered a comprehensive investigation. By part 5, Thornton Industries' stock had collapsed. Major investors fled. Business partners terminated contracts. Banks called in loans. By part 6, the final installment, the Thornton name was synonymous with corruption, organized crime, and murderous greed. Calvin watched the empire fall from his new apartment, Emma playing with blocks at his feet. His phone rang constantly. Interview requests, movie offers, publishers wanting his story. He ignored most of it. "Daddy, can we go to the park?" Emma asked, holding up a toy airplane. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." Because Calvin had one final move to make. Chapter 7: The Gathering Storm. The preliminary hearing for the Thorntons was scheduled for late November, exactly 6 weeks after they'd pushed Calvin from a helicopter. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Attempted murder, drug trafficking, money laundering, witness tampering, and conspiracy charges that carried cumulative sentences of over 200 years. But Calvin knew wealthy people rarely faced the full weight of justice. The Thorntons still had money, lots of it, hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies. They had connections. They had lawyers working every angle, looking for technicalities, filing motions, trying to get evidence suppressed. So Calvin prepared to testify, not just about the helicopter, that was obvious, but about everything he discovered. Every document, every shipping manifest, every coded conversation he'd decrypted during his 3 months of investigation. The day before the hearing, Calvin received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. Kimberly Thornton's younger sister, Brooke Sutton, a woman who'd spent her life in her sister's shadow and apparently had had enough. "I need to tell you something," Brooke said, her hands shaking as she held a cup of tea. "About Emma." Calvin's blood ran cold. "What about Emma?" "Brittany. She's not Emma's biological mother." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Calvin stared at her, processing. "What?" "Brittany can't have children. Endometriosis, severe. She had a hysterectomy at 25. Brooke looked miserable. When she married you and you started talking about kids, the family panicked. They needed you to stay. You were their perfect cover. So they arranged an alternative." "Arrange how?" "Surrogate. A woman they paid, someone desperate for money. She carried Emma, gave birth, signed away all rights. Brittany faked the pregnancy with padding and careful scheduling. You were away filming a documentary during the crucial months. They planned it that way." Calvin felt like he'd been punched. "Emma's not. Brittany never. She's her daughter," Brooke said quickly. "Biologically yours. They just used someone else to carry her. But Brittany has legal documentation claiming she gave birth. It's all forged, of course, but very good forgeries." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Brittany's lawyers are planning to use Emma as leverage." Brooke pulled out her phone, showing him screenshots of text messages. "If the criminal case goes badly, they'll file for custody. Claim you're an unfit father, psychologically damaged from your military service, paranoid, dangerous. They'll use Emma as a bargaining chip, custody in exchange for reduced charges." Calvin's hands balled into fists. "They wouldn't dare." "They would. They will. Unless you stop them first." Brooke leaned forward. "The surrogate's name is Lakeisha Chase. She's still alive, still in the city. If you can get her to testify about the arrangement, about the forgeries, you can preempt their custody move and prove the Thorntons were willing to commit fraud even in their own family." Calvin sat back, his mind racing. This was unexpected, a new front in the war, but also an opportunity. If he could prove the Thorntons had forged birth documents, it would demonstrate a pattern of deception that would destroy any remaining credibility they had with the jury. "Where can I find Lakeisha Chase?" Brooke gave him an address in Queens. "She's scared. The Thorntons paid her well, made her sign NDAs with severe penalties. But maybe if she knows what they try to do to you and Emma, she'll reconsider." The next morning, Calvin and Hayden drove to Queens. Lakeisha Chase lived in a modest apartment building, working as a nurse. She answered the door cautiously, her eyes widening when she saw Calvin. "I know who you are," she said. "I've been watching the news." "Then you know they tried to kill me and Emma," Calvin said quietly. "The little girl you carried. The child you helped bring into this world." Lakeisha's face crumpled. "I didn't know they were like that. I swear. They seem like a nice family, just having fertility issues. They paid me $60,000. I needed that money. My mother's medical bills were drowning me." "I understand," Calvin said gently. "And I'm not here to blame you. But I need your help. The Thorntons are going to try to take Emma from me. I need you to testify about the arrangement, about the forged documents. They'll sue me for breach of contract. Let them try. You were part of a conspiracy to commit fraud. But if you cooperate with authorities, the DA will give you immunity. I've already talked to them." Hayden pulled out paperwork. "Sign this, and you're protected." Lakeisha read through the documents, tears streaming down her face. "Is Emma okay? After the helicopter?" "She's fine. Resilient. Beautiful." Calvin pulled out his phone, showing a recent photo of Emma laughing. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me. She kicked constantly. I used to talk to her, tell her she was going to have a good life." Lakeisha wiped her eyes. "I'll testify. Those people don't deserve her." Chapter 8. The Trial of the Century. The preliminary hearing became a media circus. Cameras packed the courthouse. Reporters fought for seats. The Thorntons arrived in designer suits, their expressions carefully neutral, their lawyers radiating expensive confidence. Calvin arrived with Emma, Hayden, and an entourage of supporters. Marcus Hood, Elsa Shaw, Nellie Kerr, Brooke Sutton, and Lakeisha Chase. A family not of blood, but of shared purpose. The prosecution presented its case over 3 days. Evidence of the drug trafficking. Recordings of threats. Dominic Strickland's testimony. Marcus Hood's account of the helicopter flight. Medical records showing Calvin and Emma's injuries. It was damning, overwhelming, irrefutable. Then the defense took its turn. The Thorntons' lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Heather Morales, tried to paint Calvin as a paranoid ex-soldier with PTSD who'd misinterpreted business dealings and family tensions. She suggested the helicopter incident was an accident, that Antony's gun had discharged during turbulence. Then in the chaos, Calvin had fallen with Emma. "And we're supposed to believe," she said dramatically, "that Mr. Payne just happened to have a parachute hidden under his jacket? That this was all some elaborate setup?" "Objection," the prosecutor said. "Is counsel testifying?" Sustained. But the seed of doubt was planted. Maybe Calvin had engineered everything. Maybe he was the real villain. Then Lakeisha Chase took the stand. She testified about the surrogacy arrangement, about Brittany's deception, about forged birth certificates and NDAs. She showed texts from Kimberly Thornton discussing how to manage Calvin if he ever learned the truth. The defense tried to attack her credibility, but she held firm. And when the prosecution entered the forged birth certificates into evidence, showing clear signs of tampering and backdating, the courtroom erupted. "The Thorntons," the prosecutor said in closing, "are a family built on lies. They lied about their business. They lied about their daughter. They lied about everything. And when Calvin Payne discovered the truth, they tried to silence him permanently. Justice demands they face the full consequences of their crimes." The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence for trial on all counts. Bail was revoked. The Thorntons were remanded into custody. As they were led away in handcuffs, Brittany turned to look at Calvin one last time. Her expression was pure hatred. "You ruined us," she hissed. "No," Calvin said calmly. "You ruined yourselves. I just made sure everyone knew." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Calvin made a brief statement. "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth." The Thorntons spent decades hiding who they really were, hurting people in service of their greed. Today, the truth won. Emma and I can finally be safe. Chapter 9. Ashes and Renewal. The trial took place over 6 weeks in early spring. By then, the Thorntons' empire had completely collapsed. Thornton Industries declared bankruptcy. Their properties were seized and auctioned. Their bank accounts were frozen. Everything they'd built turned to ash. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty on all counts. Antony Thornton, life imprisonment without parole. Kimberly Thornton, 40 years. Brittany Thornton, 50 years, with possibility of parole after 30. Calvin wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. He was at the park with Emma, pushing her on the swings, watching her laugh as she flew higher and higher. "Higher, Daddy. I'm flying. Just like a bird," Calvin agreed, smiling. His phone buzzed with texts from Hayden, Elsa, Marcus, all confirming the verdicts, congratulating him, celebrating the victory. Calvin read them later, after Emma had worn herself out and fallen asleep in his arms on the walk home. Justice felt different than he'd expected. Not triumphant or exhilarating. Just quiet, settled, done. That evening, Calvin sat in his apartment. Not temporary anymore, but permanent. His home. He'd bought it with the advance from his book deal, working title, 15,000 feet, and furnished it carefully. Emma's room was bright yellow, filled with books and toys. His office had a view of the city skyline. On his desk sat 3 items: A purple heart from his army days, a framed photo of Emma, and a small piece of twisted metal from the helicopter, salvaged from the FBI evidence locker, a reminder of what he'd survived. Marcus Hood stopped by for dinner, bringing pizza and beer. They ate while Emma watched cartoons, talked about nothing important, enjoyed the simple peace of survival. "You did it," Marcus said finally. "Took down one of the most powerful criminal families in the country." "We did it," Calvin corrected. "Couldn't have done it without you piloting that helicopter. Easiest flight of my career. Just had to not throw you out the door." Marcus grinned, then grew serious. "But really, Calvin, what you did, letting them push you out, trusting a parachute to save you and Emma, that was insane. It was necessary. They had to commit, had to show their true nature." Calvin took a long drink of beer. "And I had to know I'd do anything to protect my daughter. Mission accomplished, brother." After Marcus left, Calvin tucked Emma into bed. She was clutching her stuffed rabbit, the same one that had been in the waterproof case during their fall. "Daddy, are we safe now?" she asked sleepily. "We're safe, sweetheart. Nobody's going to hurt us." "Good." She yawned. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Emma Bear. More than anything." He watched her sleep for a long time, thinking about everything they'd survived. The betrayal, the fall, the trial, the rebuilding. 3 months later, Calvin's documentary about the Thornton family premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. It was his most personal work yet. Part investigation, part memoir, part warning about how corruption hides behind respectable facades. The film won the Grand Jury Prize and was later picked up by a major streaming platform. Elsa Shaw's book about the case became a bestseller. Hayden Ray founded a victims advocacy group helping families targeted by organized crime. Nellie Kerr wrote a memoir about her years working for the Thorntons, donating proceeds to charity. Brooke Sutton became a foster parent, giving other children the safety her sister had denied them. And Lakeisha Chase stayed in touch with Calvin, becoming a kind of aunt to Emma, the woman who'd carried her, sending birthday cards and occasional visits, their complicated relationship evolving into something resembling family. On the 1-year anniversary of the helicopter incident, Calvin and Emma returned to the woods where they'd landed. The tree that had caught their parachute still stood, a massive oak bearing small scars from their impact. "This is where we fell," Emma asked, looking up at the branches. "This is where we landed," Calvin corrected gently. "Where we survived. Were you scared?" "Terrified, but I knew I had to protect you. That was all that mattered." Emma hugged his leg. "You're a good daddy." Calvin picked her up, holding her close. "You're a great daughter." They stood in the forest for a while, sunlight filtering through leaves, birds singing overhead. Then they walked back to the car, back to their life, back to the future the Thorntons had tried to steal. Behind them, the tree stood sentinel, a monument to survival, to love, to the lengths a father would go to protect his child. At 15,000 feet, the Thorntons had been certain they'd won. They'd been certain Calvin and Emma would splatter, becoming just another tragic accident that would be forgotten in weeks. Instead, they'd fallen, and in falling they'd flown. And the Thorntons? They were exactly where Calvin had promised they'd be, destroyed so completely that their name would